Appreciate Erica and Andrew putting all this together, and all of you coming. I think you've got a great mix with research and private landowners and different agencies that are interested in this whole process. We have NRCS has a big role to play in that we want to see the numbers documented for the presence of the Gopher tortoise. So our key area that we work on is private lands. So we have a challenge there. We smile and say we're from the government and we're here to help. So you know how that goes over sometimes. So we have to have messages coming from different angles to these landowners to assure them that the message that we're sending is consistent and something that they can trust. So there's several avenues we think can be used for that. And Allison's going to talk more about this, Allison Jenkins with the State Soil and Water Conservation Committee, but we have local conservation district boards. Michelle Ondernot was here yesterday. She's a local district conservationist, and each of these counties have local farmers conservation district boards that communicate with landowners and give us, USDA, our direction in those local areas so that any kind of federal activity that's coming down usually is explained very detailed to them, so that if questions come in the community, they can get word to word from different landowners themselves who are participating or doing it and earn that trust factor that we need to have to access those populations and let those people know that there's a benefit in it for everyone. I mean, it is to their benefit, and I'm glad in talking with private industry here today too that they recognize that and see that there's a real economic benefit for having these populations documented. But I will say this too, I think it's important that the entire ag community be brought along with that. So that means that at some point this group or at some point we need to go to Alabama Cattlemen's Association, Alabama Farmers Co-op, Alabama Farmers Federation, those different entities. Let them hear from internally from their own organization that what the benefits of this would be for us to have these populations documented, and that's what we're trying to get done. And our commitment in NRCS and what we've mainly been working on are through our financial assistance programs, which we've had a lot of money to put on private lands, and through EQIP we have the longleaf ecosystem. We have longleaf land. We have what we call landscape initiatives that send funds nationally to all the southeastern states. One of the big pushes we've had ongoing for the longest has been the longleaf pine restoration project, trying to restore the longleaf ecosystem in Alabama and Georgia and the southeast, and it's a real challenge with trying to not getting them established, but getting the fire on the ground after we get those established. The other one is that there's national initiatives across the country for different areas for different wildlife species, and one in Alabama it's Working Lands for Wildlife, the Gopher Tortoise initiative. So last year we put $3.5 million in each of those directly to private landowners to reestablish longleaf pine and to improve habitat for Gopher tortoise. So most of that habitat improvement, which is not limited just to longleaf, but it also can be used in loblolly stands, is prescribed burning and opening those up. Now we can spend all the money in the world improving habitat, but if we don't have documentation of populations that Fish and Wildlife Service has to have to make decisions on, we're not where we need to be. So we want to see that happen. We've spent probably $32 million since 2012, established over around 150,000 acres of longleaf pine, and burned a lot of acres. And still, the really key thing we're facing is, as all of you know, is the elephant in the room, the fire on the landscape. So we do have some other areas we work in. Is we have agreements with different entities. We have one with the Longleaf Alliance. A lot of our employees go through their longleaf academies, and we asked them last year to develop a Gopher Tortoise Academy. One of the benefits, I think, something like this is our field office staffs are very busy. The size of our organization, like other government organizations, is going down, but we have science, technically based people in these field offices, and you know, they've learned a lot about Gopher Tortoise that they never knew before in writing these contracts. And we depend on those technical things that we need to know about those to be, you know, one-on-one type training that we get through the Longleaf Alliance and other organizations. We also have an agreement with the Alabama Forestry Commission. We know, for example, a lot of the longleaf that we're planting through, you know, the $32 million we've spent, is a lot of that's not getting burned. And there's a lot of different reasons for that not getting burned. So we're trying something this year we've never tried before with Alabama Forestry Commission, asking them to follow up with some of these landowners that are not getting burned, where they would actually do the burning for them, put in the fire breaks, and do the burning. So we're gonna see how that goes. We also have agreements with soil and water conservation districts, provide technical assistance through them, planting assistance. The DCNR biologists that we have in our field offices that provide us assistance in developing a lot of these plans and communicating with landowners the technical aspects of it. Also, one of the bigger projects we've had in recent years is the Regional Conservationist Partnership Program, RCPP. So we're taking $12 million, there's $12 million going into what Andrew was talking about, the Coastal Headwaters Project, Andrew Schock and his group, and Jimmy Bullock and his group. So that's going to take a chunk of land down along the Perdido, up on the higher landscape, and convert it from loblolly to longleaf pine over time through the Healthy Forest Reserve Program, which is an easement program we have that allows them to maintain the timber rights, but the harvesting and management of it has to be done in a manner that would not deter or take away or threaten any threatened or endangered species like the gopher tortoise, the black pine snake, and the others that Keith just mentioned. So we think, and talking with Andrew and with Jimmy, they're interested. We're interested in seeing that, and they're working with Erica, and Jeff has also been down to look at the site. So if there's gopher tortoise populations on those sites, we want to do that, and we've set some money up through the Longleaf Alliance to do some of that monitoring. The other area that I think is important that we haven't really made it to yet is these. You've mentioned candidate conservation agreements with the state agencies. And there's some benefits, I understand, for doing that, but most private landowners don't recognize that. So one thing we've been interested in promoting, and had some leeway at one time, or had some traction with it, is a candidate conservation agreement with assurances with a baseline. So that if you're a landowner and you want to sign up for a candidate conservation agreement, it would be kind of like a safe harbor baseline. You would be only responsible for those at the time, the presence on what you had on your property when you began. So we've asked that, we've requested that, and been in conversations with Fish and Wildlife Office in Daphne about that, and we'll continue to do that. We don't have any data of populations. Really almost would rather the landowners retain that information themselves. And maybe there's a way we can do that. These private landowners, they want to participate and they want to, but there has to be some method of communication of the location of those. And I think we've had this discussion with Jeff Powell there in the Daphne office, and also with you, Josh, I think, on a phone call, that, what is acceptable. Could we give you the information on a HUC level that documented a certain population within a watershed area, and it was collected in a manner that's acceptable to them without giving the specific location? I think that would help on private landowners. Also, Chris Irwin with the American Forest Foundation. He's been very active in seeking grants for additional funding that are needed. Dr. Herman and Dr. Geyer, they need additional funds to actually complete documentation even on the public lands on the Conecuh. And then they would like to be able to do some of the computer modeling that he was talking about yesterday that would justify that our populations would have a greater potential than some of those computer models that show they're all going to go extinct. But that would take a good bit of money, but there again, that's something that we need to prove in our peripheral area how many populations would be acceptable. Surely not as many. You know, one of the interesting things too about the other states that have all of these populations, they have better land that's better adapted for those gophers, and that means that they have more open soils that without any burning wouldn't grow anything anyway, except enough ground cover for gophers to exist, and they have existed, and those populations have thrived. We have a little bit higher soil fertility here in Alabama, and everything is shaded if it's not burned. So that's kind of worked against us in having the higher population. So sometimes we have to ask, you know, hopefully we do have the populations that we need. So that means that at some point, this group, at some point, we need to go to Alabama Cattlemen's Association, Alabama Farmers Co-op, Alabama Farmers Federation, those different entities. Let them hear from internally from their own organization that what the benefits of this would be for us to have these populations documented. And that's what we're trying to get done. And our commitment in NRCS and what we've mainly been working on are through our financial assistance programs, which we've had a lot of money put on private lands. Through EQIP, we have a longleaf ecosystem. We have longleaf land. We have what we call landscape initiatives that send funds nationally to all the southeastern states. One of the big pushes we've had ongoing for the longest has been the longleaf pine restoration project, trying to restore the longleaf ecosystem in Alabama, in Georgia, and the southeast, and it's a real challenge with the trying to not getting them established, but getting the fire on the ground after we get those established. The other one is that there's national initiatives across the country for different areas for different wildlife species, and one in Alabama was the Working Lands for Wildlife Gopher Tortoise initiative. So last year we put $300 million in each of those, directed to private landowners to reestablish longleaf pine and to improve habitat for Gopher tortoise. So most of that habitat improvement, which is not limited just to longleaf, but it also can be used in loblolly stands, is prescribed burning and opening those up. Now we spend all the money in the world improving habitat, but if we don't have documentation of populations that Fish and Wildlife Service has to have to make decisions on, we're not where we need to be. So we want to see that happen. We've spent probably $32 million since 2012, established over around 150,000 acres of longleaf pine, and burned a lot of acres. And still, the really key thing we're facing is, as all of you know, is the elephant in the room, the fire on the landscape. So we do have some other areas we work in. Is we have agreements with different entities. We have one with the Longleaf Alliance. A lot of our employees go through their Longleaf academies, and we asked them last year to develop a Gopher Tortoise Academy. One of the benefits, I think, something like this is our field office staffs are very the size of our organization, like other government organizations is going down, but we have science, technically based people in these field offices, and you know, they've learned a lot about Gopher tortoise that they never knew before in writing these contracts. And we depend on those technical things that we need to know about those to be, one-on-one type training that we get through Longleaf Alliance and other organizations. We also have an agreement with the Alabama Forestry Commission. For example, a lot of the longleaf that we're planting through, the $32 million we've spent, a lot of that's not getting burned. And there's a lot of different reasons for that not getting burned. So we're trying something this year we've never tried before with the Alabama Forestry Commission, asking them to follow up with some of these landowners that are not getting burned, where they would actually do the burning for them, put in the fire breaks, and do the burning. So we're going to see how that goes. We also have agreements with soil and water conservation districts, provide technical assistance to them, planning assistance, DCNR biologists that we have in our field offices that provide us assistance in developing a lot of these plans and communicating with landowners the technical aspects of it. Also, one of the bigger projects we've had in recent years is the Regional Conservationist Partnership Program, RCPP. So we're taking $12 million going into what Andrew was talking about, the Coastal Headwaters Project, Andrew Shock and his group, and Jimmy Bullock and his group. So that's going to take a chunk of land down along the Perdido, up on the higher landscape, and convert it from loblolly to longleaf pine over time through the Healthy Forest Preserve Program, which is an easement program we have that allows them to maintain the timber rights, but the harvesting and management of it has to be done in a manner that would not deter or take away or threaten any threatened or endangered species like the Gopher, Tortoise, and black pine snake, and the others that Keith just mentioned. So we think, and talking with Andrew and with Jimmy, they're interested. We're interested in seeing that, and they're working with Erica, and Jeff has also been down to look at the site. So if there's Gopher Tortoise populations on those sites, we want to do that. We've set some money up through the Longleaf Alliance to do some of that monitoring. The other area that I think is important that we haven't really made it to yet is these, you mentioned candidate conservation agreements with state agencies, and there's some benefits, I understand, for doing that, but most private landowners don't recognize that. So one thing we've been interested in promoting, and had some leeway at one time, had some traction with it, is a candidate conservation agreement with assurances with a baseline. So that if you're a landowner and you want to sign up for a candidate conservation agreement, it would be kind of like a safe harbor baseline. You would be only responsible for those at the time and presence on what you have in your property when you begin. So we've asked that, we've requested that, and been in conversations with Fish and Wildlife Office and DAF about that, and we'll continue to do that. We don't have any data of populations documented. Really almost would rather the landowners retain that information themselves. And maybe there's a way we can do that. These private landowners, they want to participate and they want to, but there has to be some method of communication of the location of those. And I think we've had this discussion with Jeff Powell with there in the Daphne office, and also with you, Josh, I think, on the phone call, that, what is acceptable? Could we give you the information on a HUD level that documented a certain population within a watershed area, and it was collected in a manner that's acceptable to them without giving a specific location? I think that would help on private landowners. Also, Chris Irwin with the American Forest Foundation, he's been very active in seeking grants for additional funding that are needed. Dr. Herman and Dr. Geyer, they need additional funds to actually complete documentation even on the public lands on the Conecuh. And then they would like to be able to do some of the computer modeling that he was talking about yesterday that would justify that our populations would have greater potential than some of those computer models that show they're all going to go extinct. But that would take a good bit of money, but there again, that's something that we need to prove in our peripheral area, how many populations would be acceptable. Surely not as many. You know, one of the interesting things too about the other states that have all of these populations, they have better land that's better adapted for those gophers, and that means that they have more open soils that without any burning wouldn't grow anything anyway, except enough ground cover for gophers to exist, and they have existed, and those populations have thrived. We have a little bit higher soil fertility here in Alabama, and everything is shaded if it's not burned. So that's kind of worked against us in having a higher population, so sometimes we have to ask, hopefully we do have the populations that we need.